The first thing we're going to do is to paint a dark undercoat for our miniature. This will interact with the next paints and give them a rich and deep tones. The next step will be the midtone of our Death Guard green color. This will cover most of the miniature and we will be playing with the transparency of it to add depth to the miniature. I applied 4 layers of this paint, each of them covers a little bit less of the miniature than the previous one. We need to keep in mind where is the light coming from to decide what parts are more visible and leaving the deepest areas without any of this paint. This is where the dark brown remains visible. For example, in this area here, I am going to give it more color where I plan to paint some light reflections later on. Another example is the shoulder pad. We want more color on the part where the light hits it directly and less in the more hidden area. And with this, our miniature already started to show some contrast and volume, but keep in mind this is just the darkest and middle color of the miniature. We will continue to build the luminosity of the color with the next layers of paint. The next step is to add a wash to darken the green and give some dirt atmosphere. I only apply it both on the areas where the green meets the brown undercoat and some portions where I want to shift the hue a little bit. This way the darkened green areas will blend with the original brown undercoat. Be careful not to overdo this. Remember to wait until this step is perfectly dry before moving on to the next paint. Next we will apply a warm and more saturated olive green. In this case I used Elysian green. We will apply thin layers focusing on the areas that receive more light on the model. Surfaces more visible and facing upwards are the ones we are looking for this case. We will apply a few layers of this, but each layer will cover less than the previous one, similarly to what we did with Death World Forest. This will allow us to continue building the color on the transparency level of our paint. I'm looking for the more exposed areas of the model, because this is where they will receive more light. The more light, the more intensity in the color. Don't be scared of making mistakes. Since this method doesn't use wet blending, you can always go back to the previous color and fix anything. Now we go for the highlights. I am using Citadel or green camo, but you simply need a less saturated and light green. I apply this color on the more visible edges, as well as points where I want to simulate some light reflections. Just a few gentle touches with the brush is going to be enough to apply this paint. The next step is what brings a lot of luminosity and smoothness to the miniature. We will apply Elysian green again, but only in the parts where the previous Elysian green and or green camo meet, and very thinly. Once again, the transparency levels will help us blend the two colors together, while at the same time the ore green camo underneath will cause the Elysian green to gain more luminosity. And there you go! We have a nice Death Guard green color with some smooth transitions, bright highlights, dark shadows, and looks way better in person than in my crappy camera. Next we will paint these gold copper brassy sections very common on Death Guard miniatures. You often see them in the art or in the website as this gold color, yellow, sometimes orange, sometimes brown. So for this color we're going to use Balthasar Gold. Once again, the brown undercoat will help us bring up the color on these sections. We need to apply this paint in thin layers. If you think the color is too transparent, don't try to paint over again until the paint is totally dry. Once dry, the metallic paint will change in appearance and you will get a better idea of its real transparency. After this, you can go back to paint another layer of the paint until you are satisfied. You're most likely going to need 2 thin layers of this paint, but in some cases you might require a third one. Don't go beyond this, because we still are going to paint a wash, and then a layer, and then edges. So if at this point you're still not satisfied with the appearance, it's okay, because this is not going to be the final color of this section. Our wash for this color is also Agrax Earthshade, and we will apply it on large areas but avoiding the most exposed sections. Agrax is not only helping us to darken the color, but is also setting an atmosphere. By using the same wash in many colors, we are getting a more natural look on our miniature. Now, with a fully dry wash, we apply Hashed Copper. This paint has a bright orange hue and creates a nice middle ground between the dark Balthasar Gold and the Sycorax Bronze we will use for the highlights. Similarly to the Elysian Green step, this paint will feel like the real midtone for this color. I am using this paint to brighten a bit the dark bronze closer to the more exposed areas, where later I plan to paint the highlights. As mentioned before, we will use Sycorax Bronze for the highlights. This paint is highly reflective, so you should only apply it on small portions like edges or spikes. This paint is so metallic that on camera looks practically white. Be very mindful of the amount of paint on your brush, because you don't want this paint to run over other colors. Pick the priority points you want to highlight the most. Not everything needs an edge highlight. Sometimes you want a more subtle one, or sometimes you want a stronger one. This depends on where you want to catch the attention. On the areas of the model where the shadows and the highlights are close to each other and you can see them interact, is where you can truly appreciate the color they create, making the illusion as if these parts were real metal. These two are the most common colors on the armies devoted to Nurgle, both on 40k and Age of Sigmar. Now, for the other metal parts and the cloth pieces, let's go to the next part of this tutorial.